My name is Harper Lee, and at 23, if anyone had predicted that my university graduation would become the most satisfying vindication of my existence, I would have dismissed it with laughter. However, as I positioned myself on Brookhill University's central platform, microphone clutched in my trembling hands and pulse racing, watching my parents' confident expressions begin to falter from their seats among the distinguished guests in the front row, I recognized that this pivotal moment had finally come. Draped in the coal-black graduation robe of the Commerce faculty with a golden-stitched ceremonial sash across my chest, I gazed down at my parents, Douglas and Patricia Lee, who were intently observing the commencement of the daughter they had once considered too self-reliant to require assistance. Next to them sat my younger sibling, Madison, the individual I had spent years believing occupied the center of our household's attention, the favored child. I witnessed that characteristic assurance in their expressions until the graduation announcer approached the microphone wearing a beaming smile and declared, "Please join me in welcoming to the platform Harper Lee, Valedictorian of the Commerce Department and this year's exceptional student at Brookhill University." Behind me erupted thunderous applause. I observed the incredulity, followed by stunned quiet, and ultimately the ghostly astonishment painting my parents' faces. Several attendees clapped with greater enthusiasm. A handful of students shouted encouragement from the seats behind me. Yet all I could focus on were those two motionless expressions in the front section, encircled by a gathering celebrating the daughter they had never envisioned could achieve something extraordinary. They remained unaware of what I had weathered. They were oblivious to how I had discreetly secured student financing, labored 60 hours weekly, and survived on packaged ramen for months just to manage tuition costs. This was because they had informed me, community college might be a wiser choice for you. Madison is our only priority financially. That instant wasn't merely a presentation, it was a proclamation, standing proudly between their reality and mine. It marked the single occasion I gazed directly into my parents' eyes and witnessed only the boundaries they had established around me. If you've ever experienced abandonment simply because you weren't your family's main concern, if you've ever heard the phrase, "Your sister is more deserving than you," from the very individuals who brought you into existence, then continue listening. I'm about to share the narrative of how I transformed that anguish into strength, not to seek vengeance against them, but to demonstrate that I never required their selection to achieve success. My childhood unfolded in Chandler Creek, a modest community nestled along Ohio's border, where winter months seemed endlessly prolonged and everyone knew your personal affairs after a single church service on Sunday. Our residence stood at Maple Street's terminus, slate-colored roofing, precisely manicured grass, and ivory window frames decorated with artificial blooms throughout all seasons. From an external perspective, my family appeared flawlessly picture-perfect, a dependable middle-income household and two charming, well-mannered daughters. However, from within, I discovered early that not every child receives equal treatment through the lens of justice. My father, Douglas Lee, held a position at a local insurance company. He maintained constant politeness, favored systematic approaches, and particularly disliked anything suggesting elevated uncertainty. My mother, Patricia, taught high school literature in our town, an elegant woman talented at putting others at ease, though someone whose genuine thoughts remained difficult to decipher since she maintained her smile even during her most disappointing moments. Then there was myself, Harper, the eldest daughter. From early years, I discovered how to fasten my own footwear, cycle to school independently, and enroll myself in accelerated courses. This was because my mother would comment, "You possess intelligence. You don't require constant encouragement like Madison." Madison, my younger sister, arrived 2 years following my birth. With her gently waved golden hair and a radiant toothpaste commercial smile, she consistently managed to capture every gaze in any room. Madison wasn't unkind. She simply possessed a natural talent for enchanting adults, and she excelled at this far better than I ever could. During each birthday celebration, I would receive notebooks or logic puzzle books, while Madison obtained doll outfits, princess play tents, or costly sparkling playthings. When I once inquired about this difference, my mom gently responded, "You're more sensible. You don't require fancy things to find happiness." I never held Madison responsible. She hadn't chosen to become the treasured child, but I recall parent-teacher evenings when my parents would hurry to attend Madison's theatrical performances while I stood isolated beside my science project display, the one I had dedicated 3 weeks to constructing. I remember achieving runner-up position in the state-level art contest, and my mom merely remarked, "That's pleasant, dear, but perhaps concentrate more on your fundamental subjects." Yet when Madison joined the cheerleading team, our entire household celebrated with a party. Slowly, I began to comprehend something crucial. Through my parents' perspective, I represented the child who didn't require praise or investment because I could manage situations independently, because I would ultimately succeed. That very conviction, the misguided confidence they placed in me, compelled me to learn self-reliance earlier than anyone else should. However, it was also that same belief that caused them to miss the opportunity to participate in a journey they would later find challenging to understand. I started to realize that my future wouldn't resemble Madison's path at all. Beginning in 10th grade, while she received parental transportation to and from school, I utilized public transit or bicycled through brutal winter conditions. Madison had a personal SAT preparation tutor. I studied independently with worn second-hand preparation materials from the library, highlighting so extensively that the pages became tattered at the margins. But I didn't voice complaints. I embodied the quiet, persistent type, the kind who continues progressing, acknowledgement or otherwise. I participated in the Junior Commerce Club, secured first place in a regional financial planning contest during 11th grade, and advanced to state finals at merely 17 years old. Meanwhile, Madison cheered from the sidelines, directed the prom planning committee, and was highlighted in the school publication for motivating campus style trends. My parents displayed that photograph on the refrigerator like a prize. Still, I attempted to maintain faith that receiving different treatment didn't signify they didn't love me. I believed that if I accomplished enough and shone brightly enough, they would eventually recognize it and experience pride. I thought someday it would become my turn to be chosen. During senior year, Madison advanced a grade level, suddenly positioning her in my identical class. This meant we would graduate simultaneously, and more significantly, we would be submitting college applications at the same time. I still recall the evening I received my acceptance correspondence from Brookhill University, my dream institution, home to one of the state's premier business programs. I couldn't contain my excitement. I rushed into the living area, crimson envelope in hand, my face glowing with joy. "I've been accepted to Brookhill. Business major," I announced, my heart thundering within my chest. Dad glanced up from his newspaper. That's good, honey." Mom offered a weak smile. "That's wonderful, but have you eaten dinner yet?" Minutes later, Madison burst through the front entrance like a gust of wind. "I got in too. Brookhill, political communications major. I'm considering a psychology minor." Instantly, my mom dropped her spoon and rushed to embrace Madison. "Oh my goodness, I knew you could achieve it." My dad stood up and pulled out a chair for Madison to occupy. That entire evening, our house filled with laughter, but not because of my achievement. I became the blurred background to the very aspiration I had pursued for 3 years. I didn't voice complaints. I simply remained silent. But I thought to myself, they'll demonstrate fairness when it comes to tuition payments. I was mistaken. 2 weeks later, during a rare family dinner with all 4 of us present, my dad spoke in a grave tone. "We need to address college finances." I sat upright, hands gently folded beneath the table. My dad turned toward Madison. "We've been saving since your childhood. Brookhill isn't inexpensive, but you won't need to worry. Everything will be handled. You can concentrate entirely on your education." Madison beamed, nodding enthusiastically while I waited for my opportunity, but no one acknowledged me. I spoke up quietly. "And what about my situation?" The silence that ensued was disturbing. Mom looked at Dad. Dad stared at his meal. Finally, my father stated, "Harper, you understand our financial circumstances aren't very adaptable. We only possess enough to support one of you." And honestly, Madison has always demonstrated a clear, consistent direction. You frequently explored different interests, changed directions. Investing in Madison seems more logical. I thought I had misunderstood. Mom placed her hand on mine as gently as sympathy. You're resilient, Harper. You can handle this. You've always been independent, haven't you? You'll manage fine. I forced a smile, an hollow one. In my mind, a cold metallic sound echoed. Madison will provide a superior return on investment. I didn't weep. I didn't flee. I simply picked up another piece of vegetable, chewed slowly, and listened to the sound of my heart quietly fracturing into fragments. Because nothing causes more pain than realizing the people closest to you, the ones who once held your hands as you learned to walk, are the first to choose not to walk beside you into the future. That evening, after clearing the dishes and pretending nothing had occurred, I quietly slipped into my room, closed the door softly, and collapsed. I cried like I had never cried before. Not because there wasn't money for school, but because for the first time in my existence, I saw with absolute clarity that I was the one they chose to abandon. Not accidentally, deliberately, clearly, coldly. I curled up in my bed's corner, the dim yellow light from my desk lamp casting shadows on the white wall where I had once attached pictures of Brookhill and scribbled, "Believe in yourself," in thick marker. They stared back at me like a cruel joke. Believe in yourself when the very people who gave you life don't even believe you could remain in that house another night. I stuffed a few clothes into my backpack, grabbed my car keys, and drove directly to the small wooden house by the lake where Grandma Edith had lived alone since Grandpa's passing. It was late. I hadn't called ahead. But she opened the door as if she had been expecting me. Her eyes didn't question or judge. They just held the kindest form of understanding. "Come here, my girl," she said, extending her arms. I collapsed into them like an 8-year-old, sobbing into her worn wool robe. In that moment I stopped pretending to be strong. I was simply a granddaughter who had been weighed against her sister and lost. I told her everything, every word, every sentence I had swallowed. She listened without interrupting, only nodding occasionally or giving my hand a soft squeeze like she was transferring strength through her silence. "When people are too afraid of risk, Harper," she said at last, "they won't invest in what they don't understand. But you're a risk worth taking and you know that. They don't see it but you do. I do too." I took a deep breath, sat up straighter, and in that moment, something inside me became crystal clear. I couldn't allow their decision to define my path. The very next morning I began planning. If they wouldn't help me attend Brookhill, I would make it happen myself. I reapplied for every scholarship available, even those that had previously rejected me. I searched for local scholarships, corporate grants, even tiny awards worth a few $100s. I spent hours at Grandma's kitchen table composing essays, revising applications, and requesting recommendation letters from former teachers. Some evenings, Grandma Edith would bring me a cup of ginger tea, place her hand on my shoulder and say, "Continue on. I don't have money, but I have a signature." And she meant it. She signed the student loan application with me without hesitation. With a patchwork of small scholarships, a modest loan, and sheer refusal to surrender, I assembled enough for my first semester at Brookhill. But nothing remained for housing. I posted roommate advertisements, filtered through hundreds of listings, and finally found a tiny apartment a 40-minute walk from campus, shared with 3 strangers. The walls were peeling. The outlet sparked. The kitchen was coated in layers of grease from unknown origins. But it was affordable and I had no alternative option. While Madison received a brand new laptop, premium rolling luggage, and pastel bed sheets perfectly curated for Instagram, I packed my belongings into supermarket cardboard boxes. Grandma Edith helped me seal them with brown tape, then pressed an old notebook into my hands. On the first page in faded blue ink she had written, "Rewrite your life if no one else will write it for you." On move-in day, Madison posted check-in photos from her luxury dormitory and selfies with Mom in a vintage cafe near campus. Meanwhile, I drove my beat-up car, praying the engine wouldn't die mid-trip. No one saw me off. No one took pictures. No one said, "I'm proud of you." But I still stepped into Brookhill, not on a red carpet, but on my own scratched-up yet steady feet. I didn't know what the future would hold, but in that moment, I knew one thing with certainty. From now on, no one had the right to tell me I wasn't worth investing in. I would invest in myself. And they would witness every single return I earned, even if they never contributed a dime. Freshman year commenced like an unannounced storm. No gentle orientation week, no soft landing. For me, every day was a breathless sprint on a tightly packed schedule. Each morning, I awakened at 5 a.m. to squeeze in studying before my 6 a.m. shift at the cafe behind the main library. I prepared espresso, wiped tables, and scrubbed sticky blenders until nearly noon. Then I rushed back to what I called my dorm, really just a cramped bedroom in the shabby apartment I shared with 3 roommates from 3 different parts of the country. I'd change clothes, scarf down half a sandwich from the previous day, and dash to class. My days were filled with courses on economic principles, managerial accounting, and data analysis, all demanding razor-sharp focus. I didn't dare let my attention slip, not even for a moment. I took notes by hand because I couldn't afford a new laptop. Every time I glanced around at my classmates typing away on their MacBooks, I could only remind myself, I chose this path. I won't complain. On weekends, while most students went home to visit family or attended campus parties, I worked the night shift at a bookstore near campus. Selling books, tagging inventory, working the register. Some nights I got home close to 1 a.m., kicked off my shoes, collapsed onto the cold floor with my head tilted back against the wall, too exhausted to cry, to speak, or even to breathe. And still I had to keep studying, had to keep reading. Had to prepare for next week's presentations because if I failed even one class, I'd lose the tiny scholarship I was clinging to. Everything pressed against my chest, suffocating. So many sleepless nights asking myself, was I foolish to think I could do this alone? Meanwhile, Madison lived an entirely different life at the same university. I saw her world through social media. Gorgeous snapshots of a dorm that looked like a boutique hotel, sorority parties, spring seminars at Yale. She wore new ball gowns, dined at Italian restaurants, and got a birthday plane ticket to Florida. And me. I repacked my leftovers in plastic containers and calculated whether I had enough money left to buy toilet paper. I began slipping into a sense of detachment, as if I were living in a dim grayscale version of the university while Madison thrived in the Technicolor one. My apartment had leaky pipes, damp walls, and a hallway light that flickered more often than it stayed on. One of my 3 roommates, Nina, noticed I often survived on instant noodles and dry toast. She didn't say much, just one evening left a box of rice in the fridge with a note. Extra. Don't hesitate. Over time, Nina became the one person I truly talked to. She was a sociology major who cooked dinner every night and always set aside a portion for me. When I was too tired to write a paper, she brewed me ginger tea. When I fell asleep at the table from studying too late, she'd quietly drape a blanket over me, never saying a word. Nina never asked, "Why don't your parents help you?" She just stood by quietly, like an anchor post in the turbulent undercurrent of college life I was struggling to stay afloat in. One day in a seminar class on market strategies for small businesses, I presented a business model I had dreamed up back in high school, a platform to help micro-businesses manage digital content through simple AI tools. After the presentation, Professor Martin, a notoriously tough figure in our department, approached me. He placed a hand on my shoulder and asked, "Are you working a job outside of class?" I nodded. "Would you be interested in working as a research assistant? My current project aligns perfectly with your pitch. It's paid." Froze. I couldn't believe it. For the first time in months, I felt like a real door had opened. That night, I walked back to our rundown apartment with a soft smile on my lips. Everything was the same. Peeling paint, flickering lights, the lingering smell of cooking in the halls. But something inside me had shifted. I didn't know when I'd make it out of this phase, but I knew one thing. It wouldn't break me. And if it couldn't break me, it would forge me into someone that no one, not even my parents, could ever dismiss again. The research assistant position with Professor Martin didn't just help me cover part of my rent. It opened a new world, a space where I was no longer seen as the girl getting by on her own, but as someone with ideas, depth, and real potential. We worked with data on small business consumer behavior in the post-pandemic era. I had access to proprietary research, learned to interpret market trends, and took part in discussions I had once only listened to from a distance in the library. One day, after I presented a proposal for improving digital content analytics through consumer response-based AI simulations, Professor Martin looked at me for a long time and said, "Have you ever considered starting your own business, Harper?" I laughed, half joking, half serious. I used to think about it, but then I remembered, I have no money. He responded instantly without hesitation. Good startups begin with a real problem worth solving, not a big bank account. That night, I wrote the first sketch of what would become Harper Studio, a small platform offering digital content management support for micro-businesses, family-owned shops, and freelancers who weren't tech-savvy. I knew this customer base because I had once been one of them. I understood what they needed, what they didn't understand, and what they feared. I borrowed an old laptop from the school lab, built a website using free templates, and created simple service packages priced lower than a large pizza. I couldn't afford ads, but I had writing skills. I wrote my own posts, created content for social media, and promoted them on small community groups on Facebook, Reddit, and Nextdoor. My first client was a handmade candle shop owner in Carolina. Then came a freelance yoga instructor from Arizona and a family-run bakery in Chicago. Slowly but surely, I started earning a steady income. Not a lot, but enough for me to quit my night shift at the bookstore and finally study properly. Every time I signed a new contract, I sent the first message to Grandma Edith. Contract number X signed. I'm still moving forward. In junior year, Professor Martin nominated me for the National Young Entrepreneurs Conference. I was stunned. In my application, I wrote about my journey from the girl whose parents wouldn't pay her tuition to the founder of a platform helping others like her build something from nothing. The week I found out I'd made it to the national finals, I sat still in my dorm room, barely able to believe they would say my name among hundreds of startups across the country. I had done something no one thought I could. And just as I was starting to gain real momentum, Madison knocked on my door. I couldn't believe it. My sister, with dark circles under her eyes, stood in the doorway. She mumbled, "I'm about to fail my senior thesis. My professor says my research methods are incomplete. I don't know what to do." I invited her in. We sat facing each other like two worlds that had never truly touched. Madison nervously flipped through her scattered notes while I looked at her, not with resentment, but with a quiet recognition of someone watching a child experience their first taste of rejection from life. I didn't gloat. I didn't mock her. But I said something I had held inside for far too long. I'm doing this because I didn't have a choice. No one supported me. No one lifted me up. And I don't want you to be left behind the way I was. For the next 3 weeks, I helped her rebuild her entire research methodology, fixing each graph, analyzing every data point. She began to understand what it meant to truly study, to genuinely try. And for the first time, I saw Madison look at me with admiration in her eyes. One evening, as we sat buried in books, Madison looked up and whispered, "You're amazing, Harper. Better than anything I've ever been told about you. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." I didn't need her apology, but I needed that moment because for the first time in so many years, I no longer felt like the outsider in my own family. I hadn't just survived the shadows. I had started to build my own path with work, with recognition, and with relationships healed from the inside out. And I had no idea it was only the beginning. Graduation took place on a clear morning in early May. The sky was high and cloudless, the early summer sun gently warm, the ceremonial horns sounding in rhythms that made my heart beat faster. I stepped out of my old apartment with my hair neatly tied, the black gown draped over a simple but polished dress. On my shoulders hung the gold-embroidered honor stole, and around my neck the silver necklace Grandma Edith had given me, engraved with the words, "You are your own best investment." The main gates of Brookhill University were packed. Parents, students, bouquets of bright flowers, and cameras flashing non-stop. I paused for a moment beneath the row of redwood trees, gazing up at the administrative building, once the place I had rushed to so many times, pleading for tuition extensions, submitting emergency loan forms, applying for urgent scholarships. Today, I walked into that place not to beg, but to emerge as someone who had made it through it all. In the student assembly area, Madison ran up and hugged me tightly. She wore the purple gown of the political science department, her face glowing with excitement. "We're graduating together," she squealed like a child, then tilted her head and looked at me. "You're honestly the person I'm most proud of today." I smiled, not the bitter smile I used to wear, but a calm, quiet one. The kind that comes from knowing you've walked the right path, even when no one laid it out for you. We entered the ceremony hall to the sound of pomp and circumstance, rows of seats perfectly lined up by department. I sat among the business majors, where eyes kept glancing my way with a strange sense of anticipation. On stage, the chancellor opened with a speech about resilience and self-reliance. She emphasized, "There are students here today who didn't just pass exams, but overcame doubt from society, from circumstance, and sometimes from their own families." I knew exactly who she was talking about. When my name was called during the diploma presentation, I walked up to the stage with steady steps. Applause broke out across the stands. I looked down at the front row where my parents sat alongside Madison and Grandma Edith. Eyes met. My father, the one who once told me I should consider community college, was staring at me, mouth slightly open as if trying to form the words, "What is happening?" My mother clenched her hands tightly, her lips pressed together. She hadn't seen this coming. Neither of them had. Right after the degrees were handed out, the ceremony's MC smiled and raised his voice. "Now, please welcome this year's outstanding student, our valedictorian of the business department, winner of the National Innovation Award, and founder of a startup that has helped over 300 small businesses across the United States to deliver the commencement speech. Please welcome Harper Lee." The applause erupted. Someone whistled. Few people stood up. I walked to the podium, my hands slightly trembling, but my eyes clear and steady. I looked straight into the crowd. 4 years ago, I began. I arrived at Brookhill with nothing but an old suitcase, a few small scholarships, and a fierce determination not to let anyone decide whether I was worthy or not. No one invested in me. But what I learned is this: the greatest investment you can make in life is in yourself. I shared my journey, working 3 jobs, living in a moldy apartment, building a startup from scratch on a borrowed laptop from the school lab. I didn't name names, but I said, "I know what it feels like to be left out of future plans because someone decided you didn't have enough potential. But sometimes it's that very doubt that gives you the power to prove the opposite." When I finished, the entire auditorium rose to their feet. In that moment, I saw my parents standing like everyone else, but their eyes locked on me as if they were seeing me for the very first time. The chancellor stepped back onto the stage. "And now," she said, "we honor Harper Lee not only as valedictorian, but as the most outstanding student in recent history at Brookhill University." She paused, then smiled knowingly. In addition, to celebrate this remarkable journey, the university board has decided to establish the Harper Lee Scholarship Fund, dedicated to students who receive no support from their families yet rise through sheer effort and resilience. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just looked down at the front row where my parents sat frozen among hundreds of eyes. Family members, students, professors, all now witnessing what could no longer be denied. The truth had been spoken publicly, clearly, and irrevocably. And I, the child who wasn't chosen, was the one standing at the very top that day. Not because someone lifted me there, but because I climbed every single step myself. After the ceremony, as students and their families dispersed from the auditorium, I quietly made my way down to the East Campus lawn, to the old maple tree where I used to study on crisp autumn afternoons. I needed a moment of silence before facing the people I had longed for 4 years to finally say the words. "We were wrong." Not long after, I saw Madison walking toward me, holding a bouquet of white daisies, the flower I once mentioned I loved, though I had never been given them for any occasion. She looked at me, eyes red-rimmed, voice thick with emotion. "You made me so proud I almost cried. I didn't know what you'd been through until I heard everything people said today." I gently squeezed Madison's shoulder, smiling without saying a word, because everything she needed to hear, she had already heard in my speech, in the eyes of the entire hall, in the moment she herself stood up. A little while later, my parents came. They didn't walk close together the way they usually did. My mother walked slowly while my father kept his hands in his pockets, his gaze drifting as if trying to hide something behind his awkwardness. "Harper," my father began, hesitant. You really kept this all to yourself?" "Well," I turned to him and answered calmly, "I didn't keep it to myself. No one ever asked." The air thickened around us. My mother swallowed hard, then spoke as if reciting an apology rehearsed all night. "Your father and we're truly surprised. And we're truly sorry if what happened made you feel unloved." I didn't look away, nor did I nod. I simply stood there, no longer searching for validation the way I once did. "What hurt me wasn't that you didn't have the money," I said, my voice low but clear. "It was that when there was only one chance, you didn't hesitate to choose someone else. Not because she was more talented, but because I didn't fit into your idea of who was worth investing in." Madison tightened her grip on the bouquet, her eyes shifting to my mother. "Everything that happened today is the truth, and you can't keep denying it anymore." My mother turned away, her eyes rimmed with red. She let out a long breath and quietly said, "You're so strong, Harper. Maybe that's why I thought you didn't need me." I looked at her, not with anger but without softness either. Being strong doesn't mean not needing love. Just means I learned how to live without it. And that shouldn't have been a reason to be left behind. I didn't get the chance to say more because behind us, Grandma Edith's voice rang out, steady and resolute as always. "Harper doesn't need belated validation," she said, stepping between me and my parents. "She has gone farther than either of you ever imagined. And the saddest part is you missed that journey because you were too afraid she might fail." She turned to me, her gaze soft and unwavering. "You don't need anyone to clap anymore, sweetheart. You already have a world that finally sees you." I smiled, eyes stinging. In that moment, I realized I didn't need them to apologize for the past. I just needed them to acknowledge the present, that I had done it without ever being their chosen one. Madison turned to her parents. "From now on, if anyone asks who I admire most, I'll say it's my sister Harper. Not because she's successful, but because she didn't fall apart even when her own family left her behind." Those words cut quietly but deeply. My father lowered his eyes. He said nothing more. My mother placed a hand on my shoulder, gave it a light squeeze, then let go as if realizing she no longer had the right to hold on. I didn't push them away, but I didn't step closer either. I had learned to stand on my own, to know my worth without anyone else's approval. And today, when the entire auditorium stood to applaud me, I knew it wasn't just recognition. It was a testament to every person who's ever been cast aside that you can go farther than anyone ever expected, even when you started from the place no one ever wanted to stand. A week after graduation, I left Chandler Creek. There was no farewell party, no good luck wishes from my parents. I simply left them a small envelope, handwritten in the same neat script I had used for every paper over the past 4 years. "I'm not angry anymore, but I also can't go back to being the daughter who has to prove every single day that she's worthy. I'm leaving to live a life that's mine, where I'm not anyone's shadow." I arrived in Seattle with a small suitcase, a formal job offer from Stone and Rivers Consulting, and a heart that felt weightless. My new apartment sat on the 6th floor of a building near downtown. It had a west-facing balcony where the sunsets painted the sky red on days I stayed late at work. I planted a few small pots and placed a second-hand wooden desk I bought from another graduating student. On it, I set a photo from graduation day, me standing between Madison and Grandma Edith, all three of us beaming. No parents in the picture. And still I felt whole. One afternoon, as golden light poured through the window, I opened a small box Grandma Edith had sent with my final shipment of belongings. Inside was a handwritten letter and a new silver necklace. This time the engraving read, "Your worth doesn't come from approval. It comes from the unwavering belief in your own heart." I had carried that belief through everything. A few months later, the company I had built, Harper Studio, was approached by a non-profit focused on education. They wanted to partner in training digital skills for single mothers and low-income students. I said yes immediately because I had been one of them, because I knew how a single open door could change a life if someone was willing to unlock it. I used the prize money from the startup competition to establish the Harper Lee Resilience Fund, a scholarship for students without financial support from family. No GPA requirement, only their story and their effort. I wanted someone somewhere at some university to open a scholarship email and not cry because they felt alone. At the fund's launch ceremony, I said, "Some people will only see you when you succeed. But there are others who believe in you even before you begin. We don't get to choose who our parents are, but we can choose who helps us redefine what family truly means." My parents came to the ceremony. They sat in the very last row, quiet, almost like strangers attending someone else's celebration. When it ended, my mother approached and handed me an envelope. Inside there was only one line. "You were right. You've deserved to be celebrated for a long time." I folded the letter. I didn't respond, but I didn't throw it away either, because forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing not to let the pain define you any longer. Madison went on to work for a nonprofit focused on educational equity. She once told me I was the person who made her realize that privilege isn't meant to be enjoyed. It's meant to be shared. And me. I continued walking my path, with a career no one paved for me, with relationships rebuilt through honesty and growth, with a heart that no longer needed to be comforted because it had learned to beat to its own rhythm. I often stand on my balcony watching the city light up, thinking back to that first day I stepped onto Brookhill's campus with nothing but an old backpack and a determination no one else could see. I didn't need them to believe in me to move forward. I only needed myself. And if you've made it all the way here, I want you to know this. Maybe you weren't the chosen child. Maybe someone once told you that you weren't good enough, special enough, or worth the investment. But you can still go.